The Fuji X-M5 is packed with features that suggest it could be a flawless everyday camera, but unfortunately it's not quite perfect, and it definitely isn't for everyone. In today's real-world review, I'm going to show you what makes this one of the best cameras that you can buy today if you're looking for a compact, everyday camera. I'm also going to discuss a few things that are holding it back, as well as who it's actually best for. Whether you're upgrading or just curious, stick around and I'll show you why this could be the camera that changes the way you shoot day to day. I'm not going to go super in depth on specs, but I'll give you a brief overview. If you want the full list of specifications on this camera, just head over to Fuji's website and they'll have it all listed there. Now, this camera does have the 26 megapixel X-Trans 4 sensor that was first debuted, I believe, in the X-T3. It's a 26 megapixel sensor, and it does have a great reputation for image quality, though it is getting a little long in the tooth, and it's not the latest technology these days, but this is an entry-level camera, so it's about what I'd expect. That being said, they did, however, pair it with the X Processor 5, which is the same processor that is used in the flagship X-T5 and X-H2 cameras, and that's incredible because it means that this little tiny camera that costs $799 is going to get the full autofocus performance of the higher end cameras, including AI-powered subject detection for vehicles and animals and all that kind of stuff. So you get Fuji's highest level processor and autofocus in a compact, budget-friendly camera. Now, as far as continuous shooting rates, this camera shoots at 8 frames per second in mechanical shutter, and in electronic shutter you can get 30 frames per second, though there is a slight 1.25 times crop to do that. Now, as far as video capabilities, this camera can shoot 6.2K open gate at 30 FPS, as well as 4K 60 frames per second with a slight crop, though I haven't personally used either of those since I shoot everything in 4K 30. This camera unfortunately does not have IBIS, and again, that was almost certainly to keep the cost and the size of the camera down. As far as storage, this camera only has a single UHS 1 card slot, which sadly limits redundancy for professionals, which makes me hesitant to even try this out at a wedding where I just need backup. I really wish they'd have included at least the like a micro SD second card slot like Nikon went ahead and did in the ZF, just so I could have some kind of backup in the camera. That being said, I can live with it for what I'll be using this camera for. One really cool feature of this camera is that you can now, for the first time on a Fuji camera, transfer photos directly from the camera to your smartphone using a USB-C hardwired connection to the X app. So you no longer need to rely on Fuji's notoriously terrible wireless connection, which is probably a good thing. Now, this camera, as I said, retails at $799 for the body only, and if you want to get it with the 15 to 45 millimeter kit lens, you add $100 on, it takes it to $899, and I think that's a phenomenal value, and I kind of regret not getting that lens for $100 just to have it. For $100, you can't go wrong to have another lens, even if you don't think you're going to use it very often. Moving on to build quality and control layout, this is the smallest and lightest interchangeable lens camera that Fujifilm currently produces, and it weighs in at just over 3/4 of a pound for the body only. It's compact enough that with a small lens on it, you can fit it into a jacket or a hoodie pocket and just walk around for the day, which is really incredible to be able to have that much imaging power just shoved in your pocket. As far as the actual build quality, this camera is made mostly of plastic. Fuji does not advertise a metal construction or magnesium this or weather sealed that. There's really not a lot of metal, there's no weather sealing, and so I thought it might feel cheap, but I'm happy to tell you guys that it feels pretty solid in the hand, and it's a little weightier than I think I expected. Again though, it doesn't have weather sealing, so use caution using this in the rain or snow, humidity, dust, all that stuff, right? It'll probably be okay if you're careful, but don't trust it the way you would something like an X-T5. As far as the dials and controls in this camera go, they do feel solid and they click nicely. Nothing feels loose or cheap. There are no locks on the mode dial or the film sim dial to prevent accidental bumping like you would see in a higher end camera. But they have firm detents to click into place, and I've yet to have a problem with accidentally bumping them into the wrong setting. The swivel screen on this camera, it does have the swing out swivel like vlogger style screen instead of the tip out one that the still photographers tend to prefer. But like the rest of Fuji's screens, this one feels pretty solid. It doesn't feel flimsy or cheap, and I don't have any concerns that it's going to, fall apart in the short term at least. I do have some specific concerns regarding the control layout and the buttons and dials on this camera, so I'm going to take a minute to go over those in depth right now. The menu OK button and the display back button on the back of the camera, both on the bottom right, both feel a little bit loose and like springy or spongy at times, and it's kind of intermittent, but they definitely don't have the same quality that those buttons would on a higher end camera like my X-H2. Maybe that's self-explanatory with this being a cheaper camera, but it's something I noticed. The biggest ergonomic screw up with this camera is that the Q button is terribly placed up here in the top of the camera, and it's almost impossible to press without adjusting your grip, which is really annoying. I thought I might get used to this and figure out how to do it, and the truth is that I just never did. And then I went ahead and placed this SmallRig thumb bracket into the hot shoe, and that even further complicates accessing the Q button and makes it basically unusable. Now, I've accepted this because I really like the SmallRig thumb grip, and I'm going to keep that on the camera. And so what I did is I remapped the Q function, the function of the Q button, to the AEL AFL button on the back of the camera. So now when I press that, it functions as the Q button, and you can then remap the Q button to do some less common task. I have mine mapped to turn face eye detection on and off, so if I'm doing portraits, I can kind of toggle that on and off, and I don't need to do that quite so quickly. I also have a little bit of a problem with the on-off switch underneath the shutter button. I find that like the textured, like knurled part of that is just a little too flush with the camera, and so I find it hard to flip on and off. Now, this could be good if you're somebody who leaves your camera on all the time while you carry it around, because then you won't accidentally bump it off or accidentally turn it on. I'm sure this might be why they did it. For me though, I turn my camera off pretty much between shots as I walk around to conserve battery, and so I use that switch all the time, and I don't love how difficult it is to kind of grab with my finger sometimes. I wish it protruded just a millimeter farther. I also don't love the tripod socket placement on the bottom of this camera. It's not centered on the lens like you would find traditionally on most cameras, and it's so close to the battery door that if you have a quick release plate on this for a tripod, you are pretty much stuck taking that plate off to be able to open the battery door, and that gets really annoying, especially because the memory card is also inside of there. And so I've found that that is annoying. Especially if you have this camera mounted like in a cage or something, that's going to be a deal breaker unless the cage allows you to open that door with it in place. Now, there are some potential workarounds to this. I'm sure cages are going to come out that allow that door to be opened, and I'm told, and I see on the internet, that the SmallRig base plate that also adds a little bit of a hand grip does solve this by allowing your Arca Swiss plate on the bottom of the camera to remain in place while the door is opened. That being said, I haven't been able to find one in stock to order it and test it, so I can't speak to how well they've actually solved this problem. My final nitpick about the build and controls on this camera is kind of stupid, but this is an $800 camera, which is not chump change, and it ships without a plastic hot shoe cover. This is a ridiculously cheap cost-saving measure, and I can't even imagine how many fractions of a penny it costs them to manufacture one of those stupid things, or to buy it and throw it in the box. But they really could have done that. I hate not having one on there. I don't know why. I'm OCD about this, and I just like to have a hot shoe cover in place. Now, I bought this thumb grip, so that kind of solves the problem for me, but I was just really annoyed when I opened the camera and it wasn't there. Let's talk about the elephant in the room. The film simulation dial on this camera is quite controversial, and it was first introduced on the X-T50. The X-M5 is the second camera to get it. I've played with it. I've liked it less than I thought I would. I think my problem with it is that I tend to want to set a film simulation at the beginning of a photo shoot and then leave it there until I'm done shooting, because I want my photos to all have a consistent look and tell a story. I want them to mesh together, right? Changing my film simulation on the fly is not something I ever really need or want to do. And so it's been fun to play with the film sim dial and see what the different looks look like. But outside of reviewing the camera, I'm really never going to change that shot to shot, and so it's kind of useless to me. I really think that most experienced shooters like myself or other professionals that use Fuji would have preferred to see an ISO dial or something more practical here. And now I understand that we're not necessarily Fuji's target market for this camera, but they could have at least made it programmable. I think they still could. There's no reason a firmware update couldn't make this a programmable dial that I could just ignore the film simulations written on it and use it for changing my ISO or my white balance or something more important that I need to change more frequently, right? Now, do I think Fuji is going to make this change even if they can? No, absolutely not. They have shown they are committed to the film sim dial, and I think this is actually, sadly, their way to make these cheaper cameras a little bit handicapped compared to their higher end cameras. I think they realized that a lot of their cheaper cameras had too much capability and were competing a little too much with like the X-T5 and the X-H2, and so they're kind of reeling back in some of that functionality and kind of handicapping these cameras and making them a little more cheesy and beginner-like. Now, I'm not a huge fan of that, but I do understand the marketing idea behind it. It just kind of drifts away from that whole Kaizen principle that Fuji kind of lured me in with, and so I'm a little salty about it. I don't want to go on too long about this though. I do have an entire video dedicated to the film sim dial and how it interacts with custom film recipes, and that's not as intuitive as you would think. You should definitely go watch that video and see what I mean about that. I'll leave a link in the description below. Moving on to the plugs, ports, and connectivity on this camera, it has a pretty generous selection for the size and price of the body. It has a 3.5mm external microphone jack that can double as a remote shutter release plug-in. It has a 3.5mm headphone jack, a USB-C port for charging and data transfer, as well as a micro HDMI port. Now, the spec sheet would tell you those are all of the ports. However, there is also the fact that the shutter button is threaded to accept an old school mechanical cable release. I don't see a lot of people talking about that. I think we all take it for granted on a lot of Fuji's retro styled cameras, but it's a cool feature and I'm going to mention it anyway. Now, all of these ports are placed in pretty unconventional locations, and I think it's hilarious because so many people are pissed off about this. Everybody's going off about how they hate where the microphone port is and it looks stupid. I gotta be honest, I love where they put these ports. It's so much better than the traditional layout. If you don't know, traditionally, these ports would be down the left side of the camera, which would mean that when you pull the screen out, they would interfere with your view. You'd have half the screen that you couldn't see because there were cables and plugs in front of it, which has always annoyed me. On this camera, they have the microphone port on the top rear of the camera near the hot shoe, so that it's right where you would put your external mic. Usually goes on the hot shoe, and you plug right into there. You only need a cable that's 2 inches long. It's great. And then the rest of the ports are on the right side of the camera, built into the grip. And now the reason nobody's ever done this is that it makes it so that you can't hold the camera in your hand while you have things plugged in, right? You can't grab the grip the way you traditionally would. But who does this? I have never seen somebody plug into any of these ports while they're carrying the camera by the grip, right? You're either typically locked off on a tripod, you're on a gimbal, the camera's in a cage and you're using a top handle. Maybe you have it on a little mini tripod or a vlogging handle so you can hold it out and film yourself. Or even you're holding it just by the bottom of the camera to film yourself. I've never seen somebody walking around filming pointing out like this with stuff plugged in. It's just, I'm okay with this. It's a trade-off that I think is great. If it doesn't work for you, then go buy a different camera, but I think they hit a home run with the port placement. All right, let's get down to business and talk about the meat and potatoes, which is the image quality coming out of this camera. Now, we kind of already know what to expect because the sensor is a known factor and it's already been paired with the X-Processor 5 in the XS20 camera body. And so that being said, I'm not even going to show you guys image quality samples because I'm kidding. There will be image quality samples. I'm putting them on the screen right now. Don't click away. These sample photos are mostly from casual photo walks and just kind of hanging out with the camera, going on hikes with my dog, that kind of thing. Since I'm not using it really heavily in my professional work, I had it with me at a wedding the other day and I pulled it out for 1 or 2 photos, but ultimately I don't trust it. I don't know it well enough to use it in critical moments. It doesn't have a backup card slot, and so I hesitate to use it for anything where the photos are critical. That being said, the images coming out of the camera look excellent, and as expected, they match up perfectly with those coming out of my other Fuji camera bodies, which makes using them side by side to tell a story across like a day or an event really effortless. And in that regard, they do pair well with my other cameras. So this is pretty much what we've come to expect from Fuji. We know the image quality is good, we know the colors are good, the film simulations look great. And so enjoy the rest of these sample images, and I'll be back in just a few seconds to talk about low light performance. Alright, I hope you liked those sample images. Now let's talk about low light performance. I tested the high ISO performance of this camera with a super exciting scene right here in my office of this bookshelf. I took photos locked off, same settings, with ISO ranging from 200 through 51,200. The photos were shot in RAW with no edits applied other than a simple JPEG conversion in Lightroom after the fact. There's no noise reduction, no post-processing for color, none of that. And without zooming in and pixel peeping, I don't really start to see changes in the photos until we hit 3200. And it starts to become more pronounced, especially at 6400 and worse again at 12,800. But even at those ISOs, if I was on a dance floor at a wedding and my flash failed and I needed to get a photo, I can do it. It's deliverable. It wouldn't be my best photo ever, but the client would be happy to just have the photo. And so it's nice to know that I can extend up to 12,800 if needed. Now, for me with this camera and any of my Fujis, that's absolutely the max ceiling. When you get to 25,600 and 51,200, as you'll see here, the image quality really starts to suffer, as you would kind of expect, right? I'm not going to zoom into 100% pixel peep on these photos. That's not my thing. I just prefer to look at them as a whole. That being said, I know a lot of you guys are going to nerd out and want to pixel peep, so I've made these photos available for download from a gallery on my website. So there's a link in the description. There's no password needed. If you want to download these photos, click on that, go over, download the full res JPEGs, zoom into your heart's content, and play around. But overall, I think the low light performance on this camera is excellent, especially for its price as a crop sensor camera. And I have no problems with it. The low light performance is just fine. It's not going to compete with modern full frame cameras, but it's not intended to, and it's not priced like it would. Let's chat about autofocus. Now, I didn't perform a scientific autofocus test on this camera because I gotta be honest, I find them excruciatingly boring when somebody's running toward the camera repeatedly or having their dog do it. I've done these before. I don't like doing them. I want to see real world results. So I took this camera hiking with my friend and our dogs. I threw it on a subject detection continuous autofocus, and I spent the day taking photos of our dogs. These photos were already included in the image samples, but I'm going to throw them up again here so you can look at them in the context of autofocus. Know that I didn't do anything crazy. When the dogs were still or moving slowly, the hit rate was probably 80% or better, and that's shooting wide open, so I'm pretty damn happy with that. Now, obviously when the dogs started to run erratically and play and do dog things, the hit rate definitely dropped, especially if I was shooting wide open. But even shooting wide open with the dogs running all over the place, I was able to still get plenty of in-focus options to choose from. Now, the hit rate might have only been 10 or 20% with something that erratic, but I still have photos to choose from, as you see here. And so I think this camera's autofocus is perfectly adequate for real world use. Anything I do professionally where I have couples like walking toward or away from the camera, or people on a dance floor, it would achieve that just fine, just like my X-H2 does. It wouldn't be a problem. As far as video goes, we're gonna dive into the hornet's nest here. There is currently a lot of drama surrounding Fuji's video autofocus. If you're not familiar, just ignore it, don't dive in. It's a whole thing. You don't want to get involved. I, however, am about to jump waist deep into it and hope I come out the other side okay from the YouTube mob. So I think that this autofocus problem and drama is being almost entirely manufactured, or at the very least significantly blown out of proportion by a select few YouTubers who are using it just to build video engagement and try to inflate their channel and get views. Unfortunately for us, that's a highly effective strategy and it's working for them. They've really got the attention of the camera community. But I still think it's important that I kind of debunk what they're doing here, right? So the primary complaints that I've seen were previously that the face tracking would hunt around, it would lose the face in video, and it just wouldn't stay on the subject. Now Fuji has fixed that in a firmware update, and the new complaint is that the autofocus is steppy and not smooth, that it's instead of right? And now, there's some truth to this, as I'll show you, but you have to understand that these guys are filming these tests wide open with a thin depth of field. They're putting crazy bokeh balls from a Christmas tree or something in the background that really make every imperfection super obvious in the focus. And they're moving around way faster and more aggressively and dramatically than the average talking head content creator is going to, which is the primary thing face and eye detect autofocus is used for in video, right? So let's get into the tests. Here you can see me imitating the type of test I'm talking about with these people. You can see the size of the bokeh balls on the Christmas tree are kind of stepping, they're jumping from one size to the next as the focus shifts around instead of smoothly transitioning. And so I do see what they're talking about here. You can also see the camera slightly hunting to maintain focus on my face, though it's pretty good overall. The thing is that nobody shoots or moves like this in the real world, so let's try out a realistic setup where I kind of film it like I would an actual talking head video. I walk into the frame from a set location, I rock around a little, I use my hands as I talk, and all of the camera settings here remain the same, but you can clearly see that the results are much improved. They're almost perfect, in fact, and the autofocus performs just fine here. So what does this tell us? The autofocus on this camera is perfectly adequate for 99% of users, and it's not going to be a problem. Is it the best on the market? Hell no. Sony, Nikon, Canon, they're probably all better, right? But Fuji has never been known for that. The thing is, Fuji's adequate. It gets the job done. It's not, hellfire and brimstone and falling apart like they would tell you. And very few people push their cameras hard enough to require that absolute top-tier autofocus, right? If you use the cameras from Fuji in realistic scenarios, including the X-M5, the autofocus is going to serve you just fine. Don't lose sleep over it, don't listen to the drama. Grab your camera, take videos and photos, and it's fine. This video, all my videos are filmed on Fuji, and it works just fine. This video here, face eye tracking is on, and it's working just fine on my X-H2. There's no problems, right? People are just blowing this all to hell. So, moving on from the controversy, let's talk about who this camera is for. Now, Fujifilm and most reviewers will tell you this camera is designed primarily for beginners who don't have a lot of knowledge about photography, but I really don't think it's just that simple or just that shoehorned into that market. This camera technically can do just about everything that the flagship X-T5 and X-H2 can do, but it does it for less than half the price of the X-T5 and nearly down to a third of the price of an X-H2. Now, sure, it doesn't have weather sealing, IBIS, tons of dedicated external controls, it's only got a single card slot, takes smaller batteries, and it only has 26 megapixels. So yes, it has some downsides on the spec sheet, but in the hands of a competent photographer or videographer who knows the camera, understands limitations, the X-M5 really is nothing short of a pocket-sized powerhouse. This camera can do just about everything my X-H2 does, and it can do just about all of it just as well. You have to work a little more to get that quality out of it, but it can pull it off. So, well, yes, this camera is primarily aimed at entry-level content creators and beginner photographers. It can also absolutely serve as an additional backup for a professional. It can be an everyday carry camera to photograph your family or enjoy some street photography on vacation. It can be a B-cam or a gimbal camera for a professional videographer. You can use it, for the B-cam in your interviews. Or take my use case, for example, right? I'm a professional wedding and portrait photographer. I specialize in working with couples. I shoot primarily on an X-H2, but I've been using an X-T3 as my second body for a while now. I purchased the X-M5 not to use it in that work necessarily, but to have a lightweight, everyday camera that I can take on hikes, photograph my family, and it'll serve as my primary in-studio camera to film these videos moving forward. It's extremely versatile, it's great for way more than just beginners, and I really think that pigeonholing this as a beginner's camera is really underselling what it's capable of. So the X-M5 is a super intriguing camera to me, and I'm thrilled that I pre-ordered it and didn't let it slip past me the way I did when the X-E4 came out. I've always regretted not getting an X-E4 and having that little pocketable camera, and so the second I saw this come out, I hit that pre-order button and here it is. I'm super happy to have it, and just so you know, early indications are showing that just like the X100 series, Fuji is struggling like hell to keep up with this camera's demand. I wouldn't be at all surprised if scalpers start selling this for well over MSRP, the same way they have with the X100 VI, right? I think that there's a real chance that this camera is going to become a cult classic in the future, the same way that bodies like the X70, the X100 series, and even like the X-E3 and X-E4 have. Now, I could be wrong. They might catch up on production, make millions of these, and it just goes by the wayside. Only time will tell. I'm gonna hold on to mine though, you can't have it. So go ahead and check out these other videos I made about the X-M5, and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on my future content. Thanks for watching, and have a great day.